the United States of America, a nation founded on the principles of freedom, independence, and democracy. From the rugged coasts of New England to the sun-drenched plains of the West, from the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies to the vast, open fields of the Midwest, the story of this land is one of incredible resilience, ambition, and transformation. Yet, before the United States became the global powerhouse we know today, its roots were forged through centuries of struggle, vision, and revolution. Let's go back to the beginning, long before the first European settlers set foot on the shores of what would become the United States. The land was not empty. It was home to thriving, diverse civilizations that stretched across the continent. The Native American tribes, each with its own culture, language, and traditions, spanned from coast to coast, adapting to their environments and developing complex societies. In the north, the Iroquois Confederacy formed a sophisticated union of tribes, where diplomacy and governance were central to their way of life. In the southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, known for their remarkable cliff dwellings, built intricate communities in the desert. In the Great Plains, the Sioux and Cheyenne lived off the bountiful herds of buffalo, their lives intricately tied to the land and the animals that roamed it. Meanwhile, in the east, the Algonquin people thrived in the dense forests, establishing thriving villages and trade routes. These were not primitive societies, but advanced cultures with their own forms of governance, art, and spirituality. But in 1492, everything changed. Christopher Columbus's fateful voyage across the Atlantic brought Europeans to the New World, and with it began a long and tumultuous period of colonization. What followed was a dramatic and often violent transformation of the continent, as European powers such as Spain, France, and England sought to claim and control new territories. In the 1600s, English settlers arrived on the East Coast, laying the groundwork for what would become a unique and complex society. The first successful English colony, Jamestown, was founded in 1607 in Virginia. The settlers, largely made up of men seeking wealth through tobacco farming, faced tremendous hardships: famine, disease, and attacks from the native tribes. Yet they persevered, driven by the hope of prosperity. By 1620, another group of settlers, the Pilgrims, established Plymouth Colony, seeking religious freedom from the strictures of English society. This moment marked a pivotal point in the formation of the American identity, where the desire for freedom, whether religious, economic, or political, began to take root in the New World. As the colonies expanded, so too did their sense of self-reliance. By the mid-1700s, England's growing debt from overseas wars, combined with its desire to control the colonies economically, led to heavy taxation without representation, a concept that would eventually spark a revolution. The famous Boston Tea Party of 1773, where colonists defiantly dumped British tea into the harbor in protest, was just one example of how resentment was boiling over. The situation came to a head in 1775, when war broke out. The American Revolution was more than just a war for independence. It was a battle for ideals, for liberty, for self-governance, and for the right to break free from the shackles of monarchy. Key figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams emerged as leaders, rallying the colonies in the face of British might. The Continental Army, facing one of the world's most powerful military forces, endured countless hardships: freezing winters, scarce resources, and battles that seemed unwinnable. But the resolve of the colonists proved stronger, and in 1783, after years of struggle, the Treaty of Paris was signed, securing the independence of the United States of America. With independence achieved, the new nation now faced an even greater challenge: creating a government that would stand the test of time. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was drafted. It was a groundbreaking document that established a federal system of government, with a unique system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch from gaining too much power. It enshrined the rights of individuals, offering a bold experiment in democracy that had never been tried on such a scale before. But the road ahead was uncertain. Could a nation built on the ideals of liberty and democracy endure? Could such a system hold together a country that was rapidly growing, both in size and complexity? The 19th century would answer that question, as the United States expanded across the continent and became embroiled in a deeply divisive issue: slavery. In the early part of the century, the U.S. adopted a policy of westward expansion, driven by the belief in manifest destiny, the notion that it was the country's God-given right to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, orchestrated by President Thomas Jefferson, doubled the size of the nation overnight, opening up vast new territories for settlement. But this expansion came at a heavy cost, particularly for Native American tribes, who were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands to make way for settlers. The infamous Trail of Tears, where the Cherokee Nation was forcibly relocated, stands as one of the darkest chapters in American history. As settlers pushed westward, the Industrial Revolution began to transform the nation. New technologies such as the steam engine, the telegraph, and the railroad spurred economic growth, making the U.S. one of the world's leading industrial powers. Cities began to grow, and immigrants from all over the world flocked to America in search of a better life, hoping to build their dreams in a land of opportunity. But the nation was also divided. The North, with its booming industrial economy, increasingly viewed slavery as an immoral institution. Meanwhile, the Southern states, reliant on slave labor for their agricultural economy, especially the cotton industry, fought to preserve the system that had sustained them for generations. The tensions between these two regions reached a breaking point in 1861 when the Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederacy. The American Civil War had begun. For 4 long years, the country was torn apart by conflict. The North, under President Abraham Lincoln, fought to preserve the Union and end slavery, while the South fought for its independence and way of life. The war was brutal. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost their lives, and families were torn apart. But in 1865, the Union emerged victorious. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, officially abolishing slavery in the United States. Yet, the scars of the war, both physical and psychological, would linger for generations. The post-war period, known as Reconstruction, sought to rebuild the South and integrate former slaves into American society. However, the wounds of the Civil War were deep, and the journey toward true equality would be long and painful. The nation began to industrialize at an unprecedented pace, becoming an economic powerhouse. The rise of big business, factories, and railroads transformed the American landscape. By the turn of the 20th century, the United States had emerged as a global power. It played a significant role in World War I, and in the years that followed, the country enjoyed a period of cultural and economic growth known as the Roaring Twenties. Jazz music, the flapper movement, and the rise of consumerism defined the era. However, prosperity proved to be fleeting. In 1929, the Great Depression struck, sending the country into economic ruin. Unemployment soared, businesses shuttered, and millions of Americans were left homeless. But under the leadership of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the nation began to recover through his New Deal programs, which provided relief, recovery, and reform. The United States' true emergence as a global superpower came during World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. entered the war, playing a pivotal role in defeating the Axis powers. The war also marked the beginning of the U.S. as a dominant military and economic force on the world stage. The post-war years brought the Cold War, as the United States and the Soviet Union faced off in a struggle for global influence. In the 1950s and 60s, the fight for civil rights became a central issue in American society. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and countless others stood up against racial segregation and injustice. Their efforts led to landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which sought to end the systemic discrimination faced by African Americans. The 1960s also marked a new era of technological achievement. In 1969, the United States achieved one of its greatest triumphs, the Apollo 11 moon landing. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon, showcasing America's technological ingenuity and its commitment to exploration and discovery. Today, the United States continues to be a global leader in technology, culture, and politics. From the innovations of Silicon Valley to the global reach of Hollywood, America's influence stretches far and wide. Yet, the country continues to grapple with the issues that have shaped its history, equality, justice, and the ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union. From its humble beginnings as a colony of European settlers to its rise as a superpower, the story of the United States is one of contradictions, struggles, triumphs, and reinvention. As the nation faces new challenges in the modern world, be it in politics, technology, or social justice, the United States will continue to evolve, just as it always has. The journey is far from over. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more documentaries on history's most fascinating stories.